This video is going to take a look at method references that are introduced with Java 8. Method references are a concise and more readable way of writing Lambda expressions, but there's only particular use cases where we can actually use them. So first we're going to look at the syntax behind using method references. Then we're going to take a look at some examples of when we might want to use method references. And then lastly, we're just going to take a look at some of the limitations. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing for more weekly videos on Java. Now, method references are typically used to replace Lambda expressions. So to demonstrate when we would be using method references, I'm going to stream this person list that I've created. Now, a person object just contains a name and an age, and we have a couple constructors for them, and then some getters and setters and a toString method down below. I've created 4 people with 4 different names and 4 different ages, and I've passed them into a list. So now we can begin playing with this person list so we can explore some of the typical ways that we might use a stream and when a method reference might be useful. A simple way of getting a Lambda expression with our person list would be using the forEach method. So if I do person list.forEach, we can pass in a consumer that will then print out each person from our list into the console. So I'll do person with an arrow sign and then system out.println and then pass in that person object. So now by running this application, we will print each person out into our console. Now, to demonstrate method references, I'm going to rewrite our forEach method, but this time in a slightly different syntax. If I run this application one more time, we can see each name being printed to the console twice. So we can now see that this Lambda expression and the method reference that we've written down below behave exactly the same way, but their syntax is slightly different. Whereas with the Lambda expression, you specify the argument that is being passed in, and then you specify exactly how you want to handle that argument. With a method reference, there's no actual argument that's being passed or being shown within the syntax. Instead, we call the class that we want to call the method upon, followed by 2 colons, and then finally the method name. So how does our method reference actually understand what it is that we want to do? So first, what we're doing is calling the class that we want to call the method upon. So we have the system.out class, which returns a print stream. Now if I go back and I select the println method from our print stream object, we can see that it accepts an object of x and it returns void. So within our method reference, because we're doing a forEach on our person list, we know that the object that is being passed is always going to be a person object. Our person object is then passed into println, and then it is handled by println as we would otherwise expect. So this is the syntax that we'll be using for method references, which include the class, followed by 2 colons, and then the method call that we're going to make. And we can do this for static method calls, for instance method calls, and also for the constructor. And we're going to look at some examples on when we might use these. In the next example, let's say we want to map each person to their age and then print those ages out into the console. So I've streamed the person list. I've then called the .map method, and for each person that we're passing into the map method, we're then going to transform them into the person.getAge. I'm then going to print these out into the console. So we can see that this has worked. Now I'm going to rewrite this map function, however I'm going to use the method reference. Now if we take a look at the map method, it accepts a function. And from that function we can see that it accepts an object and then it returns another type of object. It could be the same object or it could be a different object. So for this map method call, we know we're passing in a person object from our person list. and we know we want to return another type of object. So in this case, what we can do is call the person class and then the getAge method. So now every person that we're going to be passing in is going to access the person class. It's going to use the getAge method to return an integer. So if we go back to our application, we've effectively performed the exact same operation of person being passed into person.getAge. However, this time we've used the method reference where we've defined the class that has the method call, and then we have the getAge method. And we can see that this has worked in an identical way. Method references can also be used when we want to call our constructors. So if we go to our person class, we can see that we have two different types of constructors, one that takes the name and the age, and another that takes the name. And let's say we want to create a list of person objects where the name is being passed in. So I'm going to create a list of strings with loads of different names. And then using these names, I'm going to map them into a new person, and then I'm going to collect all of those people into a new list. So we can see that we've taken this list of names and that we've streamed them. For each name that we have, we've then mapped that string into a new person, passing in the name. And then lastly, we've just collected it into a new list. Now we can do the exact same thing using method references. So within our map method call, we already know we're passing in a list of strings that have come from our names list. What we do now know is that we want to return a new type of object. Unfortunately, within the person class, we can pass in a string into our constructor and we can return a new instance of our person object. So using method references, what we can now do is call the person object and call the new method. And as a result, we have now mapped each of these names into a new person object, and then I can collect these into a list. So very similarly with the Lambda expression where we have the name and we're passing it into the constructor of a person with a name, we can do the shortcut of the method reference by doing the class name followed by the 2 colons and then the keyword of new. If I go into the person object and remove the constructor where a single string is accepted, we can now see these map functions breaking. The final demonstration will be on how a method reference can also be called from a class instance. So in the person class, I'm just going to create a new method. So the method is called printMyName. It accepts a person P and then it prints out the actual person's name, returning void. And the reason I have this signature is just because it fits very nicely with for each, and it's for the demonstration. And if I do for each on the person list and I pass in the instance of our person A right at the top and do 2 colons with printMyName, it will now call the printMyName method of this instance of person A, and that person's name is Albus. So we can now expect Albus to be printed to the console 4 times for each person that we have in our list. So we can see Albus 4 times, and if I change the instance of the person class that we're referencing to B, we can now expect Bellatrix to be printed 4 times rather than Albus. So this is a demonstration on how an instance of a class can be used when using a method reference. The previous example has illustrated one of the key limitations to method references, which is the same as for the Lambda expression, and that is we need to satisfy an exact method signature every time that we use it. So we must be passing in the exact object that we want, and we must be returning either the object or void as we would otherwise be expecting to. A second reason that you might not want to use a method reference or would prefer to use a Lambda expression is that the Lambda expression presents you the opportunity to define your own parameters and also a lot more logical processing for each time the Lambda expression is called. So method references can be fairly limited in the way that we use them. However, overall, they do really improve the readability of our Lambda expressions, especially by shortening them and making them a lot more intuitive to understand.